that has facilitated the shale energy revolution, and that's hydraulic fracturing. States have a proven record in regulating hydraulic fracturing for over 60 years. Obama administration officials are already on the record stating that hydraulic fracturing is safe and that states have a strong role in its regulation. The proposed BLM regulation of hydraulic fracturing on federal lands appears to be a solution in search of a problem that does not exist. The legislation that I co-sponsored with Mr. Cuellar, H.R. 2728, would stop this federal overreach by recognizing states' authority to regulate hydraulic fracturing and prohibit the Interior Department from enforcing their proposed regulations in any states that already have a regulatory protocol for this technology. There are already existing federal regulations that apply to other energy activities on federal lands. The tradition of states having a primary role in developing our onshore energy resources has contributed immeasurably to our shale energy revolution. However, in imposing another federal one-size-fits-all approach only hampers domestic energy production. The federal government already takes 10 times longer to issue an energy activity permit than states do. Why would we want to give these bureaucrats any more flexibility or tools to deter activity on taxpayer-owned lands? After all, over the last 5 years, federal natural gas production on federal lands is down over 20%, and the rest of the country has seen dramatic increases. States are better able to decide how to craft environmentally responsible regulations that reflect both the geology and the water needs of their states. This is why American energy development continues to thrive on private lands and state lands, despite the decrease on federal lands. If left unchecked, the new BLM regulations are only the beginning of more federal overreach that will eventually hamper production on private land. We're in the midst of an energy transformation, Mr. Speaker, in the way that we produce energy in this country. This energy revolution has created hundreds of thousands of well-paying American jobs in the industry. More importantly, however, energy from abundant, safe, and affordable, and clean natural gas has put America in a position to be globally competitive in manufacturing, where we can create millions of great middle-class jobs, while simultaneously meaningfully decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, as we've seen over the last decade or so. Today's rule provides for the legislation that helps us responsibly develop our taxpayer-owned energy resources, and we will later consider legislation that will bring energy to the marketplace. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the rule, and I urge support for the underlying legislation. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Utah Reserve. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Capps.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my colleague from Colorado for yielding, and Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this rule and to the 2 underlying bills. In fact, these bills are themselves solutions in search of problems. They tear down environmental protections and they restrict public participation in an attempt to expand oil and gas production. But the truth is, oil production on federal lands has gone up significantly since 2008, and federal regulations have not stopped states from implementing their own fracking rules. These bills are nothing more than reckless giveaways to big oil and gas companies that put American families and the environment at risk. H.R. 2728, for example, would preemptively prohibit the federal government from setting even minimal safety standards for fracking. Fracking, whether onshore or offshore, poses serious environmental and public health risks that we don't fully understand now. We know very little about the environmental and public health impacts of onshore fracking, and we know even less about offshore fracking. Offshore fracking has been occurring for over 20 years off the California coast, with at least 4 fracks approved as recently as this year. But federal regulators and the public only recently became aware of these activities thanks to FOIA requests released last summer. We know virtually nothing about the size of these fracks, the chemicals being used, or the impacts on the marine environment. They have been approved with categorical exemptions and decades-old permits that are woefully inadequate. And that's why I offered an amendment to H.R. 2728 to stop these activities until a full environmental review is conducted. Unfortunately, my amendment was not made in order, which is disappointing. If oil companies get to inject millions of gallons of fracking fluids into our public lands, then the least we can and must do is study the impacts of those activities. Whether it's done offshore or onshore, we have a responsibility to ensure that fracking is safe. But the bills before us this week greatly undercut this crucial responsibility, so I urge my colleagues to stop this reckless giveaway to big oil and oppose this rule and the underlying bill.
Gentleman from Colorado reserves. Gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Utah yields himself such time as he may consume.
You know, when Ronald Reagan was first elected president, he talked to his national security advisor, I believe his name was Richard Allen, told him that his policy for foreign affairs was going to be we win and they lose. It shocked his national security advisor because they'd always been talking about managing communism or coexisting with communism. This was the first time somebody had actually come up with such a specific and precise rationale and policy for the nation. But President Reagan also realized for him to actually enact his goal, they first had to fix the economy, which, as strange as it seems, was worse than the economy we have today, with double-digit inflation, double-digit unemployment, double-digit interest rates. He had to first fix that before he could go on to his goal of actually winning the Cold War. He also recognized that if he was going to fix those economic problems, he had to have a reliable and affordable source of energy. And that indeed was one of the problems that caused the situation that they were in under the Carter administration. Earlier this year, we brought a couple of bills forward, one for a Defense Authorization Act and a Defense Appropriation Act. And I said at the time that the reason we had those here was because it allowed and empowered our State Department. Foreign policy is whatever we are willing to fund as far as military growth. They are interrelated. One of the things this administration appears to have forgotten is the interrelation between improving our economy and improving energy production at the same time. Oh, they have done well in trying to forward green energy solutions. Unfortunately, as much as that is a positive and proper approach, most of what they have done has failed to reach the goals they established for themselves. And not only that, much of it has also been involved in scandals. And also, it cannot be done at the time you are attacking traditional forms of energy. So that is why we're here. One of the realities is that, oddly enough, at this particular time, we are producing more energy in America than we have for a long time. Whether one goes, and the numbers are always all over the place depending on what the starting date is of the surveys. Whether you go to an industry like the Western Energy Alliance or a neutral entity like the Congressional Research Service, they're all saying basically the same thing. There is a slight increase in offshore energy production on federal lands. There is not an increase on onshore energy production on federal lands, depending on, once again, what base you're using. And that our increase in production, which is true, has almost all come from private lands, state-owned lands, and Native American lands in this country. Now, the fact that we are closer to energy independence is nice, but that is not our goal. That's simply an infamous goal that we should have. The goal should be to reduce the amount of energy coming into this country and becoming more energy independent so we can actually help people, so that we can come to the point where we are producing enough energy from this energy-rich nation to make sure that we have affordable electricity. So when a family goes into a room, they don't have to worry about turning on the light, impacting their kids' college education fund. So even low-income families can realize they can heat their homes in the winter, so that one can travel from point A to point B in your car and realize it is affordable, so that jobs actually are plentiful, especially spin-off jobs. It's not those who necessarily are working at the site in which you are developing the energy, but the spin-off jobs, the trucker that goes to and from bringing product into or away from the site, or those who are doing the motels and the restaurants that are feeding the workers, those who are working on Main Street that are providing food and resources to those who are providing the services to those particular workers. And in western states, like the state of Utah, it is essential also to our education fund. Like, if If you were to look at this particular chart on the top, the states in red are the states that have the hardest time, the slowest growth in their education funding. Chart on the bottom, the stuff in red is what is owned by the federal government. I hate to say it, but there is a relationship between the amount of public lands owned by the federal government and the inability to try and fund a proper education system. What that comes to, in gross terms, is over the last 20 years, Western states, the predominantly public land states, have increased their education funding by 35%. The rest of the nation, which has very little public ground, has increased their education funding by 68%. They are doubling the growth of it. What simply matters is that states in the West, who are public land states, have a difficult time of funding their education system when they are prohibited from being able to develop a lot of the resources which are found in those Western states. That's one of the reasons why we have a difficult time in funding our own education system and why the first bill in this rule is asking for Western states to be treated fairly in this particular process. Whether one likes it or not, to vote against these bills unintentionally harms kids and it harms education in the West. If our funding for education in my home state is going to be effectively increased, it's got to come from development of the natural resources that are in my state and not putting impediments in the way of the state moving forward. This is the map of significance that I showed you. Everything that is red is that which is owned by the federal government, and you find, glory be, we have the predominance of it here in the West in my state. There is a difference with how energy is developed in the red areas as opposed to the basically white areas. If you were trying to develop areas in the white, which has very little federal land, simply means a company goes out, they contact the property owner, get the right to do exploration. Then if they find something in which they wish, they buy either the land or the mineral rights and go ahead and do it. On the red areas, the public land areas, the process is far, far different. It's been said on this floor that this bill would allow oil companies to go wherever they want. That is an overstatement. It's not quite accurate. In the red areas, what happens is first the federal government, in this case the Department of Interior, will establish a regional management plan to establish which areas are proper for economic development, for drilling, and for mining. Not all areas are, so not all areas become part of the regional management plan, and only those areas that have potential for economic development in oil and gas are the ones who are listed in the RMP. Then it goes through a NEPA process. Once the NEPA process for the RMP is completed, then the Interior Department decides what areas that are listed as potential energy development areas will actually be leased by the federal government. Then they are let out to bid. That also has to go through a NEPA process before finally a company can bid on lands and go through and try to find out if it is worthy to develop, and if they wish to develop, then they also have to go through an application for drilling. Now, in most states, the white area, that application for drilling by itself takes between 15 to 30 days. In the red area, that application has been averaging over 300 days, which is where the unfairness takes place. The first bill that is in this rule would say, okay, let's split the difference and we'll say you make the decision within 60 days. Plenty of time to make that particular decision. It is also noted that in all of these processes I went through, from the RMP to the NEPA process to the lease bid to the second NEPA process to the APD, there is opportunity for citizens to have input, free speech access to input. Now, that costs the department money to access that, which is true, but it is part of their job, so we accept it. However, when the bid is actually made, or a protest is made to that bid, that is extra work for the department, which in every other area of government we require a fee when some kind of citizen action requires extra work to expedite the paperwork for that type of protest or that type of policy or that type of request. The companies that do an APB are already charged that by the Department of Interior. They pay a fee of $6,500 every time they have a request to drill. This bill codifies that. But also it says that if you are going to challenge or protest one, this is not the opportunity for citizen input that you have along the process each and every step. But if you're actually going to do a challenge of this, then you also should pay a fee, because this challenge requires extra work and extra expense by the part of the department, and that is put at a $5,000 fee. $6,500 to actually request the permitting process to start, $5,000 if you want to protest it. In my state, unfortunately, we have seen examples where on what I consider to be a whim, the President or the administration or the Department of Interior has simply withdrawn leases that have gone through all of those steps I indicated and were effective and were put into motion. The first thing this administration did is withdraw 77 leases in Utah. It had a catastrophic effect upon the Uinta Basin in my home state, where unemployment skyrocketed immediately after that was done, not only because the leases were withdrawn, but the private companies that were doing their work on private lands also saw the handwriting on the wall and wished to no longer go forward with that because of the implications of those withdrawal of releases. I got a letter from one of the kids who was living there. She was in junior high. She asked me to please do something about it because her father was not working on the wells or the sites of those leases. He was one of the truckers, private contractor who was taking stuff into those sites and trucking stuff out from those sites. And she was so happy because her family had been situated, they were doing well, they had finally bought a house and bought some property, and she had her dream of finally having a horse. And she wrote with me pleading to see if we could change what this administration had done with those 77 leases so she could simply keep her horse. It didn't happen. She lost the horse. Her father lost the job. They lost the house. They lost the land. Had to go back to Salt Lake City to find employment. Recently in this same area, once again going through the process, the Interior Department identified 800,000 acres that were susceptible and appropriate for economic drilling development. They were those that were already abutting existing leases or intermingled within existing leases, but there were 800,000. When they came up with the lease process, the administration decided to only offer 144,000. And then before the lease actually went out to bid, they withdrew almost 100 of those 144,000 because they had found a question in their mind as to what the impact might be. Now, I recognize this could be legitimate. I mean, the federal government has only owned this land since the Mexican War. Obviously, there are things that can slip somebody's attention in the first 180 years of looking at a piece of property. But nonetheless, only 44,000 acres were put out to bid. That's 5% of the total that was identified as acceptable for this kind of development. Now, we're not talking about wilderness areas or national park areas or conservation areas, only areas that were susceptible and appropriate for this concept, which is why the 25% figure is really kind of a modest figure of what should be the case and should be taken. If we were to pass these two bills, it is very easy to realize that the desert could bloom again, because that is the purpose. These bills, for the first time, identify Native American interests and make sure that Native American interests on Native American lands are going to be respected by the federal government. They take it. 7 years ago, we started a fracking process in the United States, give or take a score. But this fracturing process has so far been worked. We have a list of those from the EPA, from Interior Department, from both Energy Secretaries, the last two Interior Secretaries, former EPA Administrator, the current EPA Administrator, former BLM Directors who have all said that there is no identifiable problem with what states are doing with fracturing. The states do have this experience in doing it. The language is very clear. Sometimes people say, well, there's no regulations because they can't find a specific regulation that mentions the word fracturing. But to be honest, and not trying to be too wonkish, if you have rules and regulations that talk about well bore construction or drill site integrity, that is what is necessary to ensure the health and safety of individuals. And states do know how to go to that, and they do know how to protect that area. The actual question, though, is if we are coming up with rules for fracturing, and this deals with the bill that Representative Flores was addressing, where should the decision be made on how to implement those rules? Should it be made here in Washington, or should it be made in the state where the situation exists? I have a great deal of empathy for what the gentleman from Colorado was saying is what he wished to see in his home state. I would be more than happy to allow him to do anything he wanted to do. If indeed they want to cancel all kinds of fossil fuel development in the state of Colorado, I would be more than happy to allow him to do that. I just don't want that in my state. And unfortunately, the conventional wisdom is always that only people in Washington, D.C. have the broad view to make decisions for the entire nation. That is a ridiculous wisdom. That is inaccurate. States are just as competent. There are as many smart people who live and reside in states, their Department of Environmental Qualities, as we have in the state of Utah, as live here in Washington. They can make these decisions. They can do it well. If a state does not want to make these kind of decisions, does not want to have these kind of rules, allow a national rule to take precedence. No problem. But if a state is willing to be independent and to make decisions for themselves, we should allow them to do it because the states are just as good and unfortunately often better than the federal government in making these kind of provisions. You see, one of the things that is happening is the good gentleman from Colorado did talk about what is happening in his state. And once again, if his state wants to ban all kinds of these activities, if they want to ban all development of fossil fuels, that's fine. This bill's adoption, let me finish. This bill's adoption does not stop Colorado from doing anything that Colorado wishes to do. Not passing this bill will stop the state of Utah from having primacy and doing what the state of Utah wishes to do. And look, we are not talking about decimation of enormous tracts of federal land. The state there are within the federal campus over 650 million acres. That's 1/3 of America that the federal government owns. Of those 650 million acres, 450 million acres are already set aside for preservation and conservation and will never, never have any kind of development or any kind of drilling taking place on those 450 million acres. The amount of area that has been identified as potential for economic development is only 38 million acres. But on those 38 million acres, allow the states to move forward to make sure that what the state wants on our local areas are respected, and that what happens on federal public lands is fair and equitable to what happens on private lands in non-federal states. With that, I reserve the balance of my time, and I look forward to anything the gentleman from Colorado has to say.
The gentleman from Utah reserves, the gentleman from Colorado.
Just to deal myself 30 seconds to respond. To be clear, there is not an effort in Colorado, as the gentleman insinuated, to somehow prevent the extraction of fossil fuels from occurring in Colorado. In fact, quite to the contrary, because of the lack of meaningful state regulations, many cities and counties are banning extraction. And four of the 5 biggest cities I represent have moratoriums or bans on fracking precisely because there are insufficient federal and state guidelines. So it is really working with counter purposes and hurting the very prospects for the extraction industry that the gentleman aspires to assist by not having adequate regulation to safeguard people's homes and families. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman very much. The gentleman is correct that none of the dialogue that we just heard is mutually exclusive from creating jobs, from providing a growing economy and having a sustainable environment, and maybe having even a national energy policy. This should not be a conflict between who's red and who's not in terms of land and the ability to use the federal lands and education. We can do both. And what I believe is happening is that we are trying to take sides without looking constructively at everyone's amendment to make this legislation what it should be. I have always advocated for a national energy policy. Today I rise and to discuss the amendments that I offered to try to bring people together. I listened to a discussion of since the industry pays $6,500, we must let individual protesters pay $5,000. I would venture to say that the amendment that I offered would have been a fair one, is to eliminate that amount, Could have been a compromise, make it a $1,000 fee, but in actuality this blocks individuals from even expressing their viewpoint, even though they've been able to go to the rules through the process of comment. I did get an amendment in which will help ensure that legislation, should it become law, will not apply or be interpreted in such a way that it unfairly burdens injured parties seeking relief. My amendment, number 2, indicates that there shall not be construed to abridge the right of people to petition for the redress of grievances in violation of the first article of the amendment to the Constitution, the right to protest. Other amendments that I had was also an amendment to protect individuals, farmers and ranchers and small businesses by removing the provision in the bill prohibiting recovery of attorney's fees pursuant to the Equal Access to Justice. That amendment was made in order, creating a level playing field. Can I get 1 second?
15 seconds.
Gentleman wants 15 seconds.
A number of other amendments that I offered in 2728 would have made it clear that the deference accorded to state law under Section 44 of the bill applied only to fracking operations conducted on state lands, but not on federal lands. This was a good amendment that did not make it. A number of amendments did not. Some of my amendments did, and I want to say thank you. But I believe that we can work together for a national energy policy that works for all of us. I yield back.
And the gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Utah.
All right. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate it. Let me give myself 30 seconds, if I could, simply to say that what the bill does not restrict any kind of free speech opportunity for individuals. They still have the right of comment, totally free, in any of those processes, from the RPM to the NEPA to the lease to the lease bid to the second NEPA to the APD. So that is there only when an effort actually causes an additional expense to the government, which is typical and standard. Is that fee actually going to be initiated to try and cover the costs to the federal government? It is my pleasure now to yield 2 minutes to the sponsor of the first of the 2 bills, the gentleman from Colorado who has a bill that will ensure that the standards become fair and equitable for everyone throughout this nation.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
And I thank the gentleman from Utah, and Mr. Speaker, and I want to respond to my colleague from Colorado who has raised some concerns about the issue of hydraulic fracturing. And we all agree there is a place for reasonable regulation. There is a place for the surface rights of homeowners and businesses in the area of a well to have their safety and health protected. And we would all agree with that. In Colorado, we really do have a pretty comprehensive and well thought out system of regulations. Some of the objections may really get more into state and local issues that my colleague has raised, the distance of setbacks and things like that. But I hope we cannot miss the main point. The main point, these bills are before the House this week, is we want to improve the American economy. We want to create more jobs. Energy is one of the bright spots in an otherwise anemic economic recovery. And if you look at where the energy production is really taking off, it's on state and private lands. My colleague from Colorado, it's a private land scenario that he's dealing with. Federal lands need to catch up. There are billions of acres of federal lands, including offshore. I know we're going to concentrate on onshore, but we have not kept up with energy production, and yet this has otherwise been a bright spot in our economy. So if we want to create jobs for the American people, and these are some of the best paying jobs, if we want to have an expanded manufacturing base, if we want the cost of energy to consumers to be as low as possible so that they can go out and spend their hard-earned money on everything else that they need for their families and not have as high of a utility bill, then we need to pass these 3 bills this week. Thank you. So, Mr. Speaker, there is a place to talk about reasonable regulation that has to be in place for the drilling process, for the capture of gas, for how to treat the water that comes back up from a fractured well. Yes, let's look at those things. Let's also look at the state role and not think that the federal role has to take over completely, as we have some in this administration who would like to do. But the bottom line is we need American jobs. We need a stronger economy. We need lower prices so people keep more of their hard-earned money. That's what these job bills are about this week. It's about the economy and jobs. So we will get into a discussion later today, tomorrow, and Thursday on making sure that the environment is protected, making sure that everyone else has their rights protected, but let's create jobs. That's what these bills are going to do. That's why I'm proud to be a sponsor of the bill that comes up later this afternoon, and we'll be talking more about that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Utah reserves. Gentleman from Colorado.
I would inquire whether the gentleman from Utah has any remaining speakers or is prepared to close. I am prepared to close, and I yield such time. I yield myself the remainder of the time.
The gentleman is recognized for the remainder of the time.
Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I'll offer an amendment to the rule to make sure we don't go home unless we finish the budget by December 13th. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment in the record along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to submit to the record as well a recent poll that the Denver Post published an article this past summer on that states that 30% of Colorado residents favor protecting wilderness parks and open space in our federal lands for future generations, and 30% support more drilling. If I can submit that to the record, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection.
It's been 144 days and 13 hours since the Senate passed its immigration reform bill, Senate Bill 744. We have introduced HB 15 here in the House. Each day that the House refuses to take up reform costs the country $37 million, already more than $5 billion in potential lost revenue so far. If we can take up immigration reform and pass it, I would even support allowing that revenue to be used to keep the loopholes for the oil and gas industry open, something that I've long opposed. But if we can pass immigration reform, I would accept that pay-for as a way of keeping the oil and gas loopholes open for the next several years. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office found that the comprehensive immigration reform bill would increase our GDP by 3.3%, raise American wages by $470 billion, and create an average of 121,000 jobs for Americans each year. So rather than take up a job-creating bill for Americans that reduces our deficit, we're taking up a bill that hurts the economy and hurts jobs in districts like mine. The longer we fail to act on immigration reform, the greater the cost to the American people. Let's take an example, the solvency of the Social Security system. As the Social Security Administration estimates, close to two-thirds of the 8 million people who are here and don't have documentation currently work underground. No surprise, they're not allowed to work above ground in official jobs with the payroll deductions, and neither they nor their employers are able to legally declare their earnings or pay their payroll taxes. Today, only 37% of undocumented immigrants pay Social Security taxes. Experts are estimating that our nation loses about $20 billion in payroll taxes each year. We will continue to lose that money until we pass H.R. 15 and pass comprehensive immigration reform. The Senate has acted. Strong Republican support, strong Democratic support, bipartisan immigration reform last June, and yet the House hasn't had a single moment of floor time for any immigration reform bill, despite the fact that 4 have been passed through committee. The time is now. We're here today, we're here tomorrow, we're here 2 more weeks. If we need to come back, let's do it. The country is demanding that we create jobs. Comprehensive immigration reform will do that. The country is demanding we shore up our entitlement programs. Comprehensive immigration reform will do that. The country is demanding that we reduce our deficit. Comprehensive immigration reform will do it. Securing our borders, protecting our country from terrorists. Law enforcement, the faith community, all support immigration reform. In closing, I want to again state the article I'm submitting to the record says 65% want to protect our environment, 30% are for more drilling. The people have spoken. These bills are out of touch. It's time to take up comprehensive immigration reform. I urge my colleagues to oppose the rule in the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Has expired. Gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll yield myself the remainder of our time.
The gentleman is recognized for a remainder of the time.
Appreciate the poll that was presented into the record, but that is why I would submit that the Interior Department has a resource management plan. Those RMPs are established in the first place so that incompatible relationships and incompatible entities are not put in the same area, and it's why you can actually have both. What the two bills before us that would be brought to the floor under this rule allow states to have a say in what is going on, because states are competent. They are closer to the problem. They should have a stake and make a statement in this particular issue. If these bills were brought to the floor, public land states in the West, the red area on my maps, would be treated fairly, treated closer to what is happening on the white states where there is little public land. This is also, though, one of the things that I want us not to lose focus. It's not about drilling or not drilling. It's what is the purpose of developing our energy resources. And that is to make sure that people can heat their homes and have lights in their houses, that they can drive from point A to point B and afford it, so that people can have jobs, so that that little middle school girl in my state can actually have a place for her horse. That is what these bills are about. And more importantly, for Western states, the public land state, it's to allow us to generate the revenue we need from the resources we have in our state to fund an education system. If these bills are defeated, the ability of Western land states to adequately fund their educational systems will be stymied. It is important. If you care about kids, you have to provide this kind of resource for the Western states. And that's why these two bills are not just rehashes. These two bills are essential for those of us who live in the West. And I would encourage everyone here, for the sake of the education system of Western kids, I would encourage everyone to support not only the rule, but to support both underlying bills. They are important. These are fair. This is a fair rule. It's appropriate legislation. They're good bills, a fair rule. I urge their adoption with that. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
the gentleman of Colorado
on that I
rise.
request the yeas and the nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those in favoring a vote on the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays of orders, members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption. This is a 15-minute vote.
The House for the last hour or so has been debating the rule for a couple of energy bills. One would expand drilling for oil and gas on federal land, requiring the Interior Department to come up with a 30-year strategy for the nation's energy needs and production goals. And the other bill would prohibit the Interior Department from enforcing federal fracking regulations in any state that has regulations and recognizes states' authority to regulate drilling for oil and gas. 15-minute vote here on the previous question. Then they'll vote on the rule, and the rule provides for debate on both of those bills. The first of the two bills, an hour of general debate and consideration of 8 amendments if the rule passes. And during this 15-minute vote, we will take you live now to the White House. The briefing's been underway with Jay Carney for about 5 minutes or so.
Members of Congress and allies is that we consult very closely with Israel on all these matters regarding Iran, as well as so many others. One. Two, that there is no daylight between the United States and Israel when it comes to the objective of preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Three, the fact that we believe strongly that reaching an agreement, if it can be reached with Iran, that commits Iran in a first phase to halting progress on its weapons program or its nuclear program for the first time in nearly a decade and rolling back key aspects of it, is the right way to go, because as we seek to find out whether a comprehensive agreement is reachable, it is preferable to halt that progress and roll back aspects of it to the alternative, which is to potentially pursue a comprehensive agreement without any restrictions on Iranian behavior. That, of course, would allow Iran to continue to make progress in its program, and it would forsake the potential not only for halting the progress that's underway, but from rolling back aspects of the program, which is what this agreement, if it's reached, envisions.
Does the White House have a longer-term plan for keeping senators on board with it regarding Iran so that Congress doesn't try to start another push for more sanctions later if the White House isn't ready?
What you see, sure.
Today.
Well,
Obviously,
the
today
plan is what it has always been, which is to consult closely with Congress on these matters. Today's meeting was part of that effort, ongoing effort. Congress has been an important partner in the 5-year effort under this president to make clear that Iranian behavior is the issue and to gather together an international consensus behind that premise and behind the most comprehensive set of sanctions ever put in place in history. So we'll continue to work with Congress. And what the President said and what others on his national security team have said is that we view the Congress's best use of potential future sanctions as one where they could hold it in abeyance, essentially, and hold that option in abeyance and use it if Iran fails to meet its commitments or there is not an agreement with the P5+1. So we think that would be more effective. That's the kind of conversation the President had with senators today, and that this reflects the conversations that we've been having with lawmakers all along. And I'm sure that as this process moves forward, depending on the course it takes, we will have similar conversations going forward.
One question on health care. Today, a respected security expert told Congress that the website puts user data at critical risk. How worried should Americans be about their data when they're signing up onto healthcare.gov?
I appreciate the question, and let me get to my spot here. On the issue of security, as HHS has said, the privacy and security of consumers' personal information are a top priority. When consumers fill out their online marketplace applications, they can trust that the information that they are providing is protected by stringent security standards. Security testing happens on an ongoing basis using industry best practices to appropriately safeguard consumers' personal information. The healthcare.gov website has been determined to be compliant with the Federal Information Security Management Act based on standards promulgated by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. So this is an ongoing effort. CMS and HHS are constantly testing the system and making sure that it is meeting the security standards that are in place.
Are you not concerned about this testimony that says that user data is at critical risk?
Well, again, the story I said also had, I think, if it's the same individual, and forgive me if it's not, but said that I think he was quoted saying, if I had to guess, then I would say this. And the thing is, the folks obviously working on the testing of the system and the security of the system aren't guessing. They're testing it and ensuring that it meets the standards necessary so that the information provided by consumers is secure. Let me move around. Alexis.
Jay, can I follow up on what John said? As you know, Henry Chow of CMS also indicated that the back end of healthcare.gov, the part that has to interact with the insurers, is way behind in terms of writing and completing the technical part of that to actually do the billing and to create the coverage. I have two questions. Is the President at all concerned that getting that far behind in that part of healthcare.gov will prevent policies from being issued on January 1 for those people who have to make their selections by December 15th?
I think what he testified to was the same as what he said on November 13th, which is that they are still building parts, and this is a quote, we are still building parts of the system to calculate payment, to collect the enrollment data from all the marketplaces, and to make that payment. That's from testimony a week ago, or nearly a week ago. So the breaking news alert today is actually not breaking news unless you sort of do that on a monthly basis. The breaking this month is that news. So the point is, we are still in the process of building, they are still in the process of building aspects of the site that handle back-end issues. And I would point you to his testimony in terms of where they are in that progress. I think he said 30 to 40% of it.
Later he's saying the same thing.
No, a week, 6 days.
A week later, you're saying the same thing. So I'm just trying to ask, is the President concerned? I'm
Look,
not
the
talking
President, no, I think that the President is, of course, very focused on the need to continue to make improvements to the website. As I think some reporting has indicated, there have been noticeable improvements to the site over recent days and weeks, and we expect that to continue. He is also focused on making sure that the aspects of the system that are still in build are completed on time. So there's work going on 24/7 to make sure that that happens, because our goal, as I talked about yesterday, isn't to just build a highly functioning website, but to make sure that all aspects of the system are working in a way that allows Americans who are interested in purchasing insurance on the marketplace to do so and find that they have affordable coverage available to them, often for the first time.
Second question. Jeffrey Sines is the President's pick to succeed Gene Sperling as National Economic Council Director in January.
Mm-hmm.
My question is the President considering making any adjustment to that assignment? Or if not, if Jeff is going to take over the NEC in January, who will do what he is doing now on the health care project?
The answer to the first part of the question is that Jeff Sines will be taking over for Gene Sperling at the National Economic Council in January, and I don't have any other personnel announcements beyond that to make.
Can you just add, would the President expect to find a successor manager to continue working this through into the new year?
Sure, that's a good question. I just don't have a personnel announcement to make. Yeah, John.
Jay, a couple quick things. First, the President, as you know, many times said some variation of this. We will keep this promise to the American people. If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor, period. Is that promise still operative?
John, the President made clear throughout the effort to pass the Affordable Care Act and throughout the period in which it continues to this day in which Republicans have sought to repeal it, that the vast majority of the American people, those who have insurance through their employers, who have insurance through Medicare or Medicaid, will not see a change, and that includes to how their plans allow them to get access to different doctors. The reality of the insurance system that we've seen over the years is that these plans change all the time. So there are limits if you're building on the private insurance-based system that the President is doing, using the model from a Republican governor in Massachusetts, as he did. This is not a government-run insurance program. What is the case is that if you are purchasing insurance in the marketplace, you have a variety of options available to you, from less expensive plans to more expensive, more comprehensive plans. And as is the case in insurance markets and networks all over the country, the more comprehensive plans tend to have broader networks. So if you are looking for, if you want coverage from your doctor, a doctor that you've seen in the past and want that, you can look and see if there is a plan in which that doctor participates. And that reflects the way that the private insurance system has long worked.
So is this another promise where he needs to kind of modify? Because that's not what he said. He said if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, period. But you just offered, you know, for the vast majority, and depending on which plan you keep. And
John, I think everybody understands how the insurance system works, and what the President clearly talked about throughout the effort to get the Affordable Care Act passed, and since in his efforts to make sure that it is implemented against the constant assault by Republicans who want to repeal it and replace it with exactly nothing, that the system is built on the existing private insurance system that we have in this country. And that allows for a reform that for the vast majority of the people, because they get insurance like you and I do and most people in this room through their employer or through Medicare or through Medicaid or the VA, for there to be no change beyond the added benefits that the ACA provides to all of us. And then if you are obviously uninsured, like 15% of the population, the only doctor you've been able to see is the doctor at the emergency room. And you now have, through expanded Medicaid in those states that wisely chose that option, or through tax credits that allow you to purchase affordable health care, you have a choice of doctor for the first time. If you're in the private insurance market, again, this is building on the private insurance market. There's an enormous amount of churn. If your insurance was canceled regularly, if it was changed regularly, that is part of a system that the ACA was designed in part to improve. And what is the case is that in state after state after state, individuals have more options than they've ever had before. They have different levels of coverage to choose from, and depending on the level of coverage they choose from, they'll likely have a broader network of doctors and specialists to be able to see.
And if I can just get clarification on this Henry Chow testimony. You cite what he said 6 days ago. Today, it seems he's much more specific. He's saying that 30 or 40% of this tax system that allows for the payments to go to the insurance companies has not even been built.
Well, I think they are building it, is what he said.
Yeah, he said 30, 40.
I mean, John, I guess the...
You're not concerned about that?
John, I think, again, breaking news, the website is a problem, and we have been working on it. And I know that, you know, people who are trying to work 24/7 on the website are spending a lot of time on Capitol Hill, where they're repeating testimony that they gave 6 days ago, in some cases. But the fact is, yes, we're concerned about the website. That's why the President is focused so intently on making sure that the best possible teams are working on making improvements to it, that people are working around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to fix the problems that the website itself has experienced and to ensure that all aspects of it are functioning when they're supposed to function. And you know, that's where we are on November, you know, late November in 2013. We're focused on a troubled website that needs to be fixed. We're focused on solutions to problems that exist. And rather than, you know, an ongoing political effort to undermine the Affordable Care Act without any alternative. And what every critic up on Capitol Hill of Obamacare never, you know, adds to the sentence or the paragraph is what he or she would do in the alternative. And that's because the alternative is a system where insurance companies, again, can deny you coverage because you have asthma or some other pre-existing condition, where they can charge you double because you're a woman, where they can you know, excise out coverage on a certain condition because you actually suffer from it, where they can deny, you know, give you coverage of a sort, but actually that coverage doesn't include hospitalization, so you can be bankrupt in a minute if you get sick. That's the debate we had, and in many ways, while there is justifiable focus on the problems with the launch, that's the debate we're still having, because to this day, Republicans have refused to offer an alternative. And if you don't offer an alternative, then you are passively saying that you prefer the status quo. And they ought to concede that and say they want a system where insurance companies can deny you coverage because you have a pre-existing condition. They want a system where insurers can charge you double if you're a woman, you know, insure one child but not the other because one's sick and one's healthy. You know, that's not what the President believes is right. And we are still having this debate. And we're, you know, engaging this debate obviously is made more difficult for us because of the problems with the website. And as the President said, that's on us. Shouldn't be that way, and that's why we're working so hard to fix it.
Can I just ask you if there's anything to this report, or maybe you can just knock it down, that interviews were faked in the Bureau of Labor Statistics surveys on the unemployment numbers? Is there anything?
Well, look, I would refer you to census. That story is obviously misleading. I think a lot of people shed a lot of credibility engaging in conspiracy theories last fall about you know, rigged jobs numbers. I have to tell you, as somebody who's been here for a long time, when month after month after month the jobs numbers came in and then later were revised upward, it sure didn't feel like they were helping us. I remember the 0 jobs month in August of 11. I think that's now over 100,000 jobs created. Imagine how you and others would have reported it had the actual number been more accurate.
Don't think of any of this.
Absolutely not.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Brianna.
Jay, on October 21st, the President cited the story of Jessica Stanford, a Washington State woman, as a success story. She was thrilled. She had checked into getting health insurance. She's a court reporter who has a son with ADHD, and she was quoted a price that included a subsidy, and she was very happy because she was going to be able to afford insurance. She's now spoken to CNN. She's found out actually that she does not qualify for a subsidy. It was revised down once. She now doesn't qualify. And she simply cannot afford the insurance. Now I'm wondering what the President's message is for her, having used her as a success story, and obviously for a number of people who are in a similar situation.
Well, first of all, as I know you, I think CNN included in its report, but not in that question, is that the Jessica Sanford is working with a state-based exchange. And
it was the state exchange.
Right, and we're obviously, I saw the news coverage, and I don't know whether or not the details are correct, but I can tell you that my understanding is Washington State health officials are reaching out to Ms. Sanford to make sure she has accurate information about her options, and I'd refer you to the Washington Health Benefits Exchange for more details. And now, while that state exchange has done a lot of things right, we also know that they have recently had problems with errors in tax credit estimates, and we're certainly as sorry as we can be that Jessica is one of the folks that has been affected by this, if that's the case, as reported. I think also it's important to note, again, as the state exchange looks into her personal situation and makes sure that all the numbers are accurate when it comes to whether or not she qualifies for a credit, that Jessica...
You think she may qualify for
I'm saying I have no idea. I'm saying that she got...
that she's someone who, it appears now she doesn't, and yet it's very expensive for her, and she's saying she cannot afford it.
Again, I don't know the numbers about what her income is, what the coverage cited to her is. I know based on your...
I mean, the President used her story.
Absolutely. Based on what she told the President, what she told the White House, she had been told by the state exchange when she was initially told she would get a subsidy, and therefore the coverage would be less expensive than what she's being told now. In either case, this is not the federal-run marketplace. This is a state-run exchange, so we don't have...
The concept of her being an American...
Brianna, if I could just finish my sentence for one...
If she can't afford it, and she doesn't qualify for a subsidy, and she...
And what I'm saying, Brianna, is I don't know her personal circumstances, and it's my understanding that Washington State Health Exchange officials will reach out to her to make sure that the information she's gotten is correct, because there has been, with her in particular and with other individuals in Washington State, instances of errors in the information they've been given, and that's what led initially to her believing that she would get a tax credit, and then to at least the current information that she won't. What I think is also noteworthy, and I saw it in your report or CNN's report, so I'll mention it now, is that she says she's still a supporter of the Affordable Care Act. And the Affordable Care Act is designed to give access to millions of Americans who, like her, have never had insurance before or have been uninsured for a long time through affordable quality health insurance. Again, I don't know her personal economic circumstances or what is affordable for her, but there is no question that, again, based on your reporting and our understanding of what she's told us before, that she did not have insurance before, was uninsured before.
She said she was a supporter of the ACA, but she also feels that she has not been served well by the ACA. So what is, I guess that's the response.
Well, what I can tell you is that, again, I don't know her personal circumstances. I don't know her income level or her, what goes into the calculation of whether or not she gets a tax credit. What I can tell you is that she did not get insurance at all. She was uncovered. She was uninsured, one of the 15% with zero coverage. And whether, well, again, I don't know her personal circumstances, but when we're looking at the fact that the Affordable Care Act would increase coverage in this country by tens of millions, the fact is that the status quo means that 15% of the population remains uninsured, and that 15% grows, because that has been the case over decades now, since the last effort to reform health care in this country, where the ranks of the uninsured have increased, where employers over years were shedding coverage, and premiums for all of us were going up. Health care costs were skyrocketing, and now for the first time in 50 years since data has been reported, health care costs are growing more slowly than ever.
But some people, like Jessica, may just fall through the cracks?
Well, again, I don't know her personal circumstance, so I can't keep, you know, guessing based on what you tell me. I can tell you that the Affordable Care Act is designed to provide affordable, quality health insurance to millions of Americans. What I can tell you, this doesn't apply to Washington State, but there's no question, because Republican governors around the country are making actually the fiscally unwise decision, as I think was reported about one state today, not to expand Medicaid, and they are choosing. I just said in my answer, Rion, I just said this doesn't apply to Washington, but there are millions of Americans across the country who are going to be denied insurance coverage because governors across the country decided, for ideological reasons, not to expand Medicaid to their citizens. And that's certainly unfortunate. And we're working regularly with governors around the country and lawmakers around the country to make the case for why that is not the right decision for their constituents. And you have seen Republican governors in states like Ohio and Arizona and Florida make a different choice because they know that's the right thing to do for their constituents, because providing people without insurance basic coverage through Medicaid is the right thing to do. Move around. Laura.
What's the White House reaction to the bombing of the embassy in Beirut today, and do you think, in your opinion, it has anything to do with the conflict in Syria?
The United States strongly condemns today's terrorist bombings in Beirut, which occurred near the Iranian embassy. We extend our condolences to the victims of this tragic event and to their families. We call on all parties to exercise calm and restraint to avoid inflaming the situation further. We support the government of Lebanon's commitment to conduct a thorough investigation into this attack. We look to all parties to cooperate with the investigation and urge that those responsible are brought to justice. Acts of terror only reinforce our determination to work with the institutions of the Lebanese state, including the Lebanese armed forces and the internal security forces, to ensure a stable, sovereign, and secure Lebanon. In terms of the purpose of the attack and those responsible, you know, we've seen reported claims, but obviously we're making, as others are making, early assessments.
But in this part of the world, people are...
And that continues online at cspan.org. Watch live coverage there. The House winding down this first vote, 15-minute vote on the previous question dealing with the rule for two energy bills. The first one, should the rule pass, will be a bill expanding oil and gas drilling, making it easier to drill for oil and gas on federal lands. That bill would have an hour of general debate and 8 amendments. And that's the next vote. The rule vote is next here in the House.
On this vote, the yeas are 223. Oh,